Hello, my name is Noah Coburn, and today I'd like to go through a little bit of the automation surrounding creating work orders and assigning their pricing and costing to the tech and to the client associated with the work order. Now, this is all for an application called Tech Engine, which we're developing. And essentially, just a quick overview of the application. Various companies will sign up to use the Tech Engine service. They will submit work orders to the Tech Engine service, and Tech Engine as a company will find the appropriate tech to do the job while maintaining decent margins for the company, as well as supplying the tech with the adequate pay that they need. So here I am on the actual work order page, and I have a list of specs out here for how they want the work order to work. But essentially it all boils down to finding an end result to pay the tech and an end result to charge the client. Now there's lots of numbers that come together to make those totals, but when you're designing this type of automation, it's usually good to start with the end result and then kind of work backwards to find the numbers that come together to make that final result. So I have a little section of automation of interface here that that I use to build things in development so that my client can't see them during the actual development process. And this is where I'm going to start to actually build lots of this automation and the database fields associated with the automation. So what I first need is fields to store the total tech pay and the total invoice amount. So I'm going to do that by creating the fields on the work order table. And these will both be currency fields, and they'll be total tech pay and total invoice amount. So next, there's actually going to be a few fields that come together to make total tech pay. There's going to be an hourly rate for the tech and an hourly rate that gets charged onto the client. Now, not only is it going to be a single hourly rate, but there's also a difference between the first hour's rate and any additional hours rates. So I'm going to create the first hour tech pay rate, and that again is going to be a currency field. And there's going to be additional hours tech pay rate. And similarly on the invoicing side, there's going to be a first hour client charge rate and an additional hours client charge rate. So in addition to these rates, I also need a field to represent how many hours were actually invested in the project, so I can charge for those hours at the associated rates. So I'm going to have a field for total number of hours, and that's going to be calculated by a start time and an end time that the tech will actually enter when they submit their timesheet, but we won't get into that for right now. So I'm going to start with these values, and it's worth noting that most of these fields won't exist in the interface. In fact, most of them will just be set behind the scenes, and they will end up kind of bubbling to the top to end up creating, or to end up calculating the total tech pay and the total invoice amount. But pretty much these fields, the totals, and maybe a couple of the others will be shown in the interface, but most of them will not. So, firstly, and actually, I need to back up here for a minute. I missed one thing here. Now, the total tech pay is actually going to be composed of more than just the pay for the hours they work. There's also other factors that come into play here. So what I'm going to do is, we won't get into the other factors right now, but what I'm going to do is create additional fields to show the total tech pay that comes from labor and the total invoice amount that comes from labor, and that's what we're going to focus on calculating right now, and we'll fold in the other numbers that flow into the total tech pay and total invoice amount later on. So I'm creating total tech pay from labor And again, that's going to be currency. Total invoice amount labor. And we'll focus on generating the values that go into the labor fields first. And let me just reorganize those real quick. Okay, so essentially anytime the first hour pay rate, the additional hours tech pay rate, or the total number of hours change, I need to recalculate the total tech pay that comes from labor. So what I'm going to do is access the actions for the first hour pay rate, and I'm going to say anytime this field changes, I'm going to drag a field change evaluation into the interface, and I'm going to say first hour tech pay rate. If that has any change, then I need to recalculate the total tech pay that comes from labor. Now I'm going to need to do the same type of calculation in a few different places. So I'm actually going to create a function to calculate the labor pay rate, and I'm going to execute it in all those different places. So I'm going to call it calculate tech labor pay. Alright, so just talking through this automation real quick, conceptually before we get into it, what's going to happen is we need to figure out if the number of hours involved here is greater than 1, then we need to actually charge part of those hours at a different rate than the other hours. If it's less than 1, we're going to charge all of the hours at the higher first hour rate. So my first action here is actually going to be a numerical comparison to see if my number of hours is greater than 1. So I'm going to say total number of hours. If that is greater than, and I can just use a static typed in value of 1. Now if that's false, that's the easier case to deal with, so I'll deal with that one first. If it's false, we're just going to take the total number of hours and multiply by the first hour rate and save that into the total tech pay from labor. So I'm going to set the total tech pay from labor with, and I'm going to use an arithmetic function, and my function is going to be multiplication, and I'm going to take the total number of hours and multiply that by the first hour tech pay rate number only field. And I'll just type a quick description for what I'm doing. This is total number of hours times the first hour tech pay rate. And I'm done with the labor in that case. Now the other case is that there's more than 1 hour in here, so we have to actually charge at 2 different rates. So I'm going to use a different field save action. And we can't actually use the simple function in this case because we need 2 different arithmetic functions that are then added together. So I'm going to set the total tech pay from labor, and I'm going to use an advanced formula. And I'm going to start making this structurally. So my whole expression is going to be, one entire expression, obviously. So it's, if I decompose at one level, it's going to be first hour pay plus successive hours pay, right? So what is first hour pay? Well, first hour pay breaks down into 1 hour times the amount for the first hour, or the rate that the first hour's pay is charged at. So which, obviously, anything multiplied by itself is itself. I'm sorry, anything multiplied by 1 is itself. So that first hour's pay is actually just the first hour pay rate. First hour tech pay rate and I'm going to use the number only value, and that's what goes in the first hour's tech pay. So the successive hours pay will be the total. I'm going to have to break this down one more level, so I'm going to put in a set of parentheses here, and this is going to be the number of hours minus 1 times the successive hour additional hour pay rate. So additional hour pay rate we have as a field, so I can just pull that. Additional hours tech pay rate as a number only, and the number of hours minus 1 is going to be total number of hours minus 1. So I have a few redundant parentheses in here, but I don't really care about them. They won't hurt anything. So I'll go ahead and save that expression, and that's going to be what results in my total tech pay. And let me just type a quick description. Total tech pay from labor is first hour pay rate plus number of hours minus 1 times the additional hours pay rate. So that does it for my tech labor pay. So I'm calculating that appropriately whenever the first hour tech pay rate changed. So now I need to run that same automation anytime the additional hours tech pay rate changes, or whenever the total number of hours changes. So on the additional hours tech pay rate, when that gets updated, I'll check to see if it changed. Additional hours tech pay rate. And if that is the case, I'm going to recalculate the tech labor pay using that function that I just created. So I don't have to do any of the successive automation again. Now similarly, whenever the number of hours changes, I need to run that same function. So whenever a total number of hours has any change, I'll execute that same function. So that does it for the tech labor pay side. Now, similarly, on the other side, we need to calculate the total invoice amount that came from labor, and that'll be from the total the first hour client charge rate, the additional hours client charge rate, and the total number of hours. So I'll start with the first hour, and this is going to be pretty much identical to the automation that we just created, but it's just going to use different fields. So first hour client charge rate, if that changed. Then I'm going to create another function to be calculate invoice labor charge. And similarly, my first thing is going to see if there's more than 1 hour. If total number of hours is greater than 1, if that's false, I'm going to set total invoice amount from labor to the total number of hours times the first hour client charge rate. that's not the case, then I need to charge it two different rates, and I'll just use the same conceptual math that I used previously. So total invoice amount from labor, and I'm going to need an advanced function, and it's going to be first hour client charge rate plus total number of hours minus 1 times the additional hours client charge rate. Alright, so that concludes my calculate invoice labor charge function, and I need to have that same function go on additional hours charge rate anytime it changes. And similarly when total number of hours changes. Now I already have the evaluation on total number of hours from my previous function, so I just need to run one additional function in that same evaluation. Alright, so that concludes calculating the total tech pay from labor and the total invoice amount from labor. So one more thing that I want to work into this during this tutorial is the charges and pay that gets associated from parts. Now in this specific application, how it works is the tech actually logs in and denotes the value of the parts that they want to charge onto the client. So the tech enters the total value of the parts, and that's actually a marked up amount that includes a fixed percentage markup that is somehow worked out between them and the tech engine corporate. So when they'll enter their total charge amount to the client, and then on tech engine side they have a separate deal worked out where tech engine actually takes a fixed percentage of the parts charge that they charge onto the client. So bottom line is I need two additional fields on the work order, one for total parts charged to the client and one for total parts pay to the tech. And additionally, I'll need to create an application setting which determines that that multiplier that they'll use in order to get the total tech pay from parts from the total invoice charge from parts. So this is the total invoice amount from parts and the total tech pay from parts. And I'm going to switch the order of those two just to keep tech pay on the left and invoicing amounts on the right. Alright. So the last thing I need to do here is go into my application settings and create a setting that determines that multiplier that we need to use in the calculations. So I have this global settings table that handles all the settings that I want my client to be able to set on their side in the application. So under the work orders section here, I have lots of settings on this table. So there's work order statuses, and in addition to that, I need to create a section for payment and charge rates. and I haven't created the field yet, so I'll create it blank at first. Now this new field is on the global application settings table. And this is going to be a number. So it's a percentage or a multiplier that we're going to use. So I'm going to create this, and I'm going to fill it in with a sample value. And I'm going to set that sample value to 95%, just for testing purposes here. Now I'm going to go back to my work order. Alright, so now I need to set up some automation that anytime the tech enters the total invoice amount from parts, I need that to automatically calculate the total tech pay from parts, which will be the invoice amount from parts times that multiplier. So anytime total invoice amount changes, total invoice amount from parts changes, and again this is going to be directly set by the tech. Then I could use a function at this point, but since this is the only place that it's actually going to be used, it's a little redundant to use a function. And I'm going to set the total tech pay from parts to be, and now here's a kind of tricky section here. I need to build an expression that uses one piece of data from the current record and another piece of data from the global application settings record, which has no connection to this work order at all. So what I need to do is actually use a sub-expression. And in order to use a sub-expression, I need an advanced expression. And I'll start with just my main expression having pure inheritance. Now, the overarching function I'm going to use is arithmetic, and it's going to be a multiplication between two values. So the first value is going to be the total invoice amount, and the second value is going to be the multiplier that I will get. So the total invoice amount is that comes from the total invoice amount from parts field on the work order, and the multiplier, that's what I have to get from the global application setting. So I need a sub-expression. So next to this sub-expressions drop down, I can click the green plus here, and there's actually a CSS issue in this app right here, so I can't see the expression and sub-expression fields, but if you highlight everything you can kind of see where they're at. So I'm going to click over into the sub-expression, and for the query, and again can't see anything unless you highlight everything, but for the query I'm going to change it to be the one and only one record in the global application settings table, and I can get that one record by just clicking to search all of them. And since I have separate automation that ensures that there's only ever one at a time, I can know that it's getting the right record. And for the expression that I will use in my sub-expression, or the value that gets returned by my sub-expression, I'm going to find that field that I just created, work order charges multiplier for parts pay, and use that in my sub-expression. Now I'm going to go back to my main expression and just confirm that it looks right. This is my total invoice amount from parts, the number only value of that, multiplied by the multiplier I used in the app settings table. And that looks right, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. And quick description. And there we go. And that's actually all there is to it for those two. Now the final step in this is I actually want to end up calculating my total tech pay and my total invoice amount from their respective parts. So for now, my total tech pay is going to be total tech pay from parts and total tech pay from labor. My total invoice amount is going to be total invoice amount from parts plus total invoice amount from labor. So anytime either of these values change, I need to update the total, and anytime either of these two values change, I need to update their total. So I'll start with total tech pay from parts. And similarly, I'm going to check to make sure it changed first, so I'm not recalculating redundant values. Total tech pay from parts. And I'm going to use a function since I need to do this in at least two different places. And this is actually a really simple function. It's just going to add two values together. So total tech pay is going to equal total tech pay from labor and total tech pay from parts. And the operation is addition, so I'm good. So that covers when total tech pay from parts changes. Now I also need when total tech pay from labor changes. And if it does, I'll just reuse that same function. Calculate total tech pay. Now similarly on this side, I need to calculate my total invoice amount. So I already have the changed evaluation from the previous function that I made. And I need one more function to calculate total invoice amount. And again, this is going to be a very simple formula to just add those two values together and save them into the total invoice amount. Total invoice amount from parts plus total invoice amount, total invoice amount from labor plus total invoice amount from parts. And I'm good. And that concludes my function. I just need to put that in one more place whenever the labor changes. Oh, sorry. I'm going to execute that function that I just made to calculate the total invoice amount. And there we go. Now to test this, I'm going to actually fix all of the values that get calculated from others. And by fix, I mean just make them view only, and so that they're not editable in this interface. And I'm going to vary the other actual editable entities and make sure that they calculate properly. So I'm going to go through the calculated values, change them all to view only. Total tech pay from parts is view only. Remember, it's the total invoice amount that's actually entered from parts, that is. And the labor totals are also view only. Oops, So I'm going to edit this little interface, enter my various amounts. I'm going to say that $40 was charged to the client from parts. The tech gets paid at $40 for the first hour and $35 for additional hours. And let's say that there was 8 hours involved in this project. The client gets billed at $60 for the first hour and $55 for additional hours. And that is all the values I need to save. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to make sure that my values all calculate appropriately. So there's 8 hours here. So this should have been 7 hours charged at $35 an hour plus the $40 for the first hour. So I'm pulling out my calculator separately to verify this amount. So that should be 7 times 35 plus 40. And that's 285, which is right from my labor, plus 38 from parts, and that equals 323. It looks like I have an issue there. I'll look into that just in a minute. On the other side, I should have 7 hours at $55 an hour plus $68 for the first hour plus $40 for parts. And so that side is right. There seems to be something wrong in my total tech pay. It looks like it's off by $2. I'm guessing that when I set up my function to calculate total tech pay, I used the total invoice amount from parts instead of total tech pay from parts. So let me confirm that. Oh. Alright, so as a result of total tech pay from parts getting set, it checks to see if it changed, and I calculate total tech pay. Yep, I used the wrong value over here. So this right side of the expression should be total tech pay from parts. So I'll just open that function up again. And I'll change total invoice amount from parts to total tech pay from parts. Now those are right. And I'll just change something to make sure my values recalculate appropriately. And I'll bring up my calculator here again. So we got 6 hours at $35 an hour plus 40 for the first hour plus 38. Now I got zeros calculating in there. Why is that? Alright, there they go. So just to confirm, bring up my calculator one more time. Hopefully this is the last time. So 7 hours at $35 an hour plus $40 for the first hour plus 38 for the part. That gives me my 323. So that part's correct. And then for the invoice amount, we got, again, 7 hours times 55 plus 60 for the first hour plus the 40 for parts, and we get the 485 for the total invoice amount. So this actually concludes today's tutorial. And again, this was calculating cost and price on a work order from the various component parts that make it up. And please stay tuned for more installments, and visit our wiki for more information at wiki.workexpress.com. And thank you very much for watching.